Welcome back to the Simple Farmhouse Life podcast. I'm sitting here in my kitchen today, not my normal podcasting area. Actually, at this point, I don't think there's any normal podcasting area for me because we have kids napping one place and another, and so you never know where I'm going to be. But today, I'm going to be chatting with an old-time blogging friend, Deb, from Seeking Lavender Lane. She is one of my first blogging friends. When I first started blogging, I really got into the home decor, interiors, blogging space, and that's what I pretty much thought I'd be going for. Now, my content that really fuels my blog, fuels my YouTube channel is mostly food. And so you probably just know me as sourdough, food from scratch. But I also just love interiors and design and vintage finds. And so occasionally I have people on to talk about our homes and how we want our homes to make us feel, how we collect for them, make them cozy. I feel like that goes in so many ways with simple farmhouse life or any lifestyle really, to make your home feel and reflect how you want your lifestyle to be. And so without further ado, I'm bringing on Deb from seekinglavenderlane.com and at Seeking Lavender Lane on Instagram to chat vintage finds, design. Her blog is heavily focused on that. So if you want some inspiration in design, her Instagram is absolutely beautiful. You will find lots of ideas there to incorporate into your own home. So let's chat. My name is Lisa, mother of 7 and creator of the blog and YouTube channel Farmhouse on Boone. Join me as I share with you my love for creating a handmade home from scratch cooking and a little mom and entrepreneur life along the way. Hey, Deb.
Hi.
So glad to finally have you back on. It's been a while since I've had you on here. And so I'm really glad that we decided to finally sit down and do this again. So for those of you who don't know you, which if you're in the decorating space, if you like old world design, like I like so much. So this podcast, we talk about like homesteading and from scratch food, but also I bring in my love for old and antiques and all of that. So Deb is in that space, and so you probably know her, but go ahead and tell us a little bit about you and your home and your blog and all that good stuff.
Yes. So I was on, I guess maybe about 2 years ago, I think, Lisa, right? So I have been blogging for about 9 years now on Seeking Lavender Lane, which started out as our first home we bought as a family, and we took a very cookie cutter home and turned it into a very like farmhouse style home. And since then we renovated a new house about 4 years ago, and I kind of incorporated more of my recent love, which is like European farmhouse. So kind of combining both that casual feel of farmhouse, but with the old world touches of that European lifestyle and lots of great vintage finds and warm colors and, you know, just that comfort and old world together. And we did that about 4 years ago, and we're constantly, you know, still making changes. And I share all about it on Seeking Lavender Lane and our Instagram. You could see a lot of, you know, now reels and all of that over there. And also on Pinterest, I'm always pinning, whether it's my own decor or also just different, you know, old world inspired interiors that I just like love to look at and like be able to apply.
Yeah, and if you are looking for some inspiration, Deb's home is absolutely beautiful. She combines antiques, vintage finds, some new things, color, but then also some patterns. So it's very beautiful. Tell us a little bit about you have a new venture. Am I understanding that it's kind of like an antique mall, but online? Like there's vendors maybe?
That's like the perfect description of it. So it is a vintage marketplace. So the concept is that we created a website that you can easily browse and shop all your favorite vintage vendors through. So just like going through an antique mall where you could look at one booth to the next, well, it's the same idea, but online. And so we currently host different vendors from all throughout the country, a couple in Canada. And it's really fun, and we're really excited about this new venture. I think it's something that the vintage world really needed. And for us, like vintage enthusiasts that just love the hunt and love the like finding great vintage items, I think it's going to be a really great place to shop, and then for our vendors to sell through.
Yeah, that sounds really awesome. I've been checking it out, and there's definitely a lot of good finds. I'm excited to keep following along because a lot of times with my house, there's something very particular that I'm looking for. and it's really hard to find. And sometimes it's better even just to reach out to somebody online or find something that's more curated. You can always find something for a bargain. You can find it over time, but usually it just takes forever. That's been my experience with like when I want something very specific.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's true.
I think for most people, the thing that's most intimidating and confusing about incorporating vintage pieces is defining a style so that it doesn't look like it's from the thrift shop or garage sale. What are some of your curating tips so that does not happen?
Yeah. So with Vintage Keepers too, we have an online quiz that we developed because I know that this is where a lot of people struggle with, whether they like multiple styles or they just can't figure out what it is that they like. And so we have a quiz on our website that you can take, and it can spit out exactly what your vintage interior style is. But for curating a space, I think the key that I always try to tell people is really just go with what you love. And I know sometimes it's a little harder for people to know what they love, but when you look at something, whether it's art or a sculpture or a picture or anything like that, like try to find things that draw you in, and that's what becomes your style. You know, I think sometimes when we get so focused on following trends and following other accounts, sometimes we could lose our own personal style because we're just trying to incorporate what they're doing. And so I think that that's a really good tip, is what draws you in. But I do think inspiration photos do help to give you some type of guidelines. So that way, if you know, I love using Pinterest just for my own, you know, to try to keep me on track. And so by pinning different photos that might feel like, for me, like European or old world, I know when I'm going out and curating a style, I know that those homes are showing a lot of copper and maybe some great, you know, old world pottery and portrait photos and things like that. And so those are things that I will keep my eyes out for when I'm curating a space.
Yeah. I sometimes struggle with the doing what I love because I feel like it really does morph over time. Like as you're exposed to maybe more books or more images or different influences, I find that, oh, I actually really love that, but maybe I didn't know that I loved it 10 years ago. Have you saw that with your own style, like it evolving over time, even though some people say, well, this is what I've always loved. And they almost say it as if that there wasn't any influences that actually fed into that love. So how has that shaped for you over time?
I love that. I feel like that's so true. I think our style is allowed to evolve. And I think sometimes it's based on, you know, where we are in our life. So when I think back at like 21-year-old Deb, like, you know, I got married at 21. And when I look even just like at my wedding style, I'm like, oh my gosh, like what was I thinking? You know, so like, but I was 21. What did I, you know, I was a kid still. So there's that. There's like the just like time and just, you know, growing up and all of that. But I also think trends have influence, and I think it's okay. Like I think sometimes people get afraid of that word trend and they feel like, oh no, I'm not trendy. But trend is important, and we do have influence with that. So I do think that definitely has something to do with it. You know, I think seasons, I really do feel like seasons, whether it's in your life or seasons like real seasons, you know, like I just recently changed something in my house where me and my husband had built a plate rack back in the winter. And I liked it at that moment. And then now that it's summer, I started feeling like it felt too cluttered and I wanted simplicity. And so I swapped it because I'm in a different season. Maybe more was better in the winter. And now I want something fresher, you know? So I think that those are all good things. And I think it's okay to grow with your style and fall in love with different things. And, but I think there's always like still part of us, like I will say for myself, like even as a kid, I used to like love going into old homes, and I've always loved vintage. I've always loved old things. And so I've always carried that. Like, I don't think I could ever be somebody who likes a modern style. I just don't think that I would go that extreme. But like maybe, you know, all of a sudden I started incorporating some red in my house recently, and I'm not a red girl, but for some reason in this chapter, I'm open to red. So I think it's okay.
Yeah, I totally know what you're saying there. So, yeah, when I think about my style, I was trying to sort of define it. I know that it is country, vintage, comfortable, like kind of relaxed, but that particular style I find in my own home can take a lot of different forms. So there's a time when I went through sort of a minimalist, but still very country. And then now I just ordered 15 rolls of wallpaper and like 25 samples. And so my question to you, with you saying, okay, he put up this really cute plate rack, which it was adorable. I remember seeing your reel that I think it went really well. Got a lot of views on it. And then, you change your mind. Mm-hmm. What am I going to do if I don't like this green floral wallpaper that's going to go up my Victorian staircase and have to go like 20 feet high? What then, Deb?
Well, it sounds amazing, by the way. So
maybe don't do wallpaper.
It's so hard because sometimes, like, especially being a creative person too, I feel like sometimes we just want to take those leaps of like faith in our creativity and we just want to test the waters. I get bored. And so for me, I'm like always up for trying something. And I guess maybe this is not great advice, but I'm kind of like, well, we'll figure it out down the road if I want to change it. Like I did wallpaper in my daughter's room. Oh gosh, maybe was it a year and a half ago. And, my thought was, well, she might not love that forever. And then, will I love this forever? And it's permanent wallpaper. It's not that like peel and stick kind. And so I just was like, you know what? I love it now. I'm going to do it. I'll figure it out down the road if something changes. I mean, you can remove wallpaper, so it's not a bad thing. But I feel like my advice might not be good, but I'm like, just do it. I feel like you're going to love it now and then you'll figure it out, So the wall behind me used to have wallpaper, but it was a peel and stick. So just do it. I think it's going to be great.
I'm totally going to. Well, so I'm going all in. I'm not only doing the staircase, I actually have chosen, this is how I guess I do things. I don't know. I've chosen 4 different wallpapers and they're going to go in the entryway, the bedroom, the kitchen, and the staircase. So I'm not just starting. Like I did like a poll on my Instagram, where I was like showing the different options and obviously people weigh in, but I'm like, I don't know why I asked. I don't care. I'm doing it. Yeah. I'm doing all of it.
I love
people
it.
Like, why don't you just try one room? And I'm like, love your advice. I'm not doing that. Don't know why I asked for advice on that.
Sometimes it's that impulsiveness. Like you just have to do it. You have to see it. You have the vision right now. And I think with the architecture of your house, it's just going to feel so classic, like maybe if you had like a brand new house, it would be hard because maybe the style of that home, it could look nice with wallpaper, but maybe it's not like authentic. Like that feels like it's going to be authentic with your house.
Yeah, that's, I think, what I'm struggling with is I came to this house, we painted it and brought all of, like right when we moved here, we redid the floors, painted it and brought all of our furniture from our last house. And I thought, oh, that's great. I'll just transfer my entire style to this house and it'll be done. And it's very wrong. Like it does not do well with just off-whites and these like very boring minimalist colors. The ceilings are tall, everything's a little bit grand, and it doesn't work. So I know I already did it wrong. And so I guess I'm not too hesitant to try something else, but we'll see. I might regret it, but it's one of those things where, like you said, I can always just take it back down. It's not that big of a deal.
I think the key to like what you said was that like you lived with your house this way. And I really think that that's so true. Like even in my own house, like there was decisions I made early on. And living here has taught me like that actually certain things don't work. And so I think sometimes you do have to give yourself that time to like sit with things and decide if it's going to work or not. How long have you been in your house? Like 2-3 years now?
3.5.
Your current house?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Oh my gosh, that went so fast.
Yeah.
So you like lived with it and you're like, it needs something different. This is our old house style. So I love that.
Yeah. So, okay, talking about vintage finds and collecting and going back to this idea of not buying all the wrong things, that it looks not curated and it looks not like a garage sale. Do you recommend for people who don't have a knack? Because I feel like some people have a natural knack to know what pieces go together, but then some people need a guideline. So do you recommend defining a style?
Like finding a style first before like jumping in and like curating or shopping?
Yeah, just being like, okay, so on your vintage keepers, you have these mood boards like rustic, eclectic, farmhouse, grand millennial, and it looks like maybe for some people, they want a certain look in their house, but they really don't have an eye for how that would all piece together.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe looking at something like that or collecting together a Pinterest board or some way of defining what you're going for. Is that something you typically recommend?
I definitely recommend that. Again, like not to like keep bringing in Pinterest, but I think Pinterest is such a key for people today. So I did this like design class 2 years ago. And then one of the things that I had taught the women that took the class was like, really study what you like, create a board that feels like your style. So you collect all these different like images that feel like you, something that draws you in. And when you study those pictures, you're going to notice right away what seems to be constant, you know? So for me, like I love copper. And so I just seem to always either save like through Instagram or pin so many kitchens that have copper. And so I know that that's my style. I know that that's what something that's drawing me in. And so that's going to help me to source items that are similar. I feel like with Vintage Keepers, we're trying to do a few different things with it. Obviously, it's the shop, right? But we also are trying to kind of educate our customers. And so like with our Instagram account, we started doing these like different boards. We have the quiz. So we're trying to, to teach people that. And I think that that's going to really help because I think a lot of people, like you're saying, love vintage, but they love how other people do it. But they're like, okay, but how do I do that? Like, how do I know that if I look at this piece, it's good? But I will say one of the nice things about vintage when you do start looking at items is that quality stands out. Like you can see when there's quality of something. And so if, I also always look at the bottom of like where something's made. So if it's like made in France or Italy, I'm like usually like, okay, well, it's made in France. It's probably a good piece, So like looking at things like that, signatures, quality will help you realize when you are collecting things to look for that. But just to, say with Vintage Keepers, what we're doing too is you'll see if you go to our website, you could shop by style and you can also shop by product and then you could shop by shop. And so you can go into all of our different shops on there and every one of our vendors kind of has their own curated style. You'll notice that. And so what I love about that is like, it's kind of like when you go into your favorite booth at an antique mall, I like her stuff. And so you kind of seem to return to that same booth. Well, same thing with Vintage Keepers. It's just the online experience. Like you might say, oh, I love this person's shop. So you can follow them and you can continue to shop from them to kind of curate that style too. So I think those are all like different things that we're trying to do to help our customers really like navigate on what they should be shopping for.
Yeah. And I think too, I was thinking about how your home style is really such a reflection of your lifestyle. So when I say I like country, well, that embodies like my whole life. Like what I enjoy doing is having a farm and living in the country and having, a lot of children. And so obviously your home style is going to reflect your lifestyle. So if there's just even certain hobbies you're drawn to, it comes out in how you want your home to feel. I don't feel like I'm saying that very well, but it made a lot of sense in my head.
It's 100%. And one of the big things that I always just like say is like experience your home. And you'll see that on my Seeking Lavender Lane, like Instagram, like I truly believe we should experience our homes. And I mean, we spend every day here, right? So vacations are nice, but we spend maybe a week on vacation somewhere. So I really believe that we should experience our home every day. And so obviously there's hustle and bustle. We're working, we're raising our children, we're, running here, running there. So we're doing all those other things, but like you can make time in your home to experience it. And so by the way you style your home, it kind of like, it just all kind of comes together of this, like, this is my lifestyle. Like I love, I would love to live in Europe, but I don't live in Europe. So, okay, I'll bring Europe home, So all those kinds of things, like having a great rocking chair on your porch because you love the slow moments with coffee in the morning and your Bible or things like that, So those are all things to experience your home. So I definitely think like decorating your home like that is key. If you're a minimal person, you don't like a lot of stuff, you might not be somebody who's a collector, but like if you love that farmhouse feel, you love seeing like your shelf behind you, the collection of all, your spices and your pantry and things like that. So it's definitely it should go together. And even like the way you dress too, all of it's part of your lifestyle.
Yeah. And if it doesn't go together, it's something that you're going to be fighting a lot too. Like with me having a lot of kids, this house, it just is very, it has to almost look pretty while also being a little bit messy. And so I created this feel, or at least I've tried to create this feel to where there's a lot of cozy things that are almost, if they're not perfectly in place, it still looks nice. Whereas if I was, say, a single person in the city, I might have this aesthetic that it's very polished in how it actually looks best, whereas mine fits in with my lifestyle and like a lot of things being out and exposed and showing, I enjoy being in this kitchen a lot with cooking. And so I have herbs hanging and spices readily accessible and cast iron skillets stacked on the stove. Having it seamlessly fit into your lifestyle means it probably is more your style just because of where you are, in your life. So
100%. I love that.
So what are some of your favorite vintage finds in your home? I know you have a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
Any good finds?
I do. I would say, so a couple favorite pieces. I'll give you three. I mean, there's a lot. And basically my whole home has been curated with vintage, and I love shopping the flea market. To me, it's become my favorite pastime to do. It's become a hobby. I mean, I've sourced so many things for so cheap, and it just like comes together so nicely. But I would say the three top favorites is I have a great pine cabinet, and it's kind of like this, like between our dining room and our hallway. It's like an awkward space since our house is, we have an open concept, but it was also an addition. So the way our layout is a little different, but it's a great pine piece. I got it on Facebook Marketplace a few years ago. I can't even tell you how much I paid for it because it was so ridiculously cheap. And I think there's a long story with it. And some of my followers know this because the guy actually called me about a month later to ask for it back because his wife like freaked out that he sold it to me for so cheap. So it was this long story. And I was like, oh my gosh, but I'm so in love with the piece. I can't part with it now. So anyway, that was a crazy experience, but greatest piece. I love it. Like it's one of those staple items too, for me, that just feels like my style. It's just really beautiful. And I took some of the drawers out too, which I kind of love because it just feels a little bit less heavy for that space. And I could like kind of decorate in between where the drawers were. So that's definitely like top. Another one is I have this great moody floral painting that's in my bedroom. And I love this piece so much. I got it for a great price. And I don't know what it is. I love moody artwork, and I love like oil paintings a lot. And it just feels so perfectly placed in our bedroom, and it's above our bed. And I just really love it. It's just another great piece. And I sourced that at the flea market. And then the last one is I have a dish rack, which sits like on my counter. And that was a Facebook Marketplace find. And the funny thing is I bought it on Facebook Marketplace, but became friends with the lady who sold it to me because she has an antique booth like in like a beach town close to us. And so we're like friends now and everything. And I had bought it from her. Just love it. I love that it also, because our kitchen's kind of newer and it kind of gives us more of that collected feel, like brings an antique piece to it. And so it's probably like one of my number one asked questions of like sources in my house, that we actually ended up finding a carpenter to mimic the piece. And so we sell it on my website now because I had been asked so many times, and I'm like, it's vintage. And I think that's the hardest thing about having a public home, is that like if something is vintage, you can't really point somebody in the right direction where to get it. And so in this case, I was like, we have to find a way to like recreate this because it really is so great. And so we now sell it on my website, which is awesome. But I won't give up the original. So, and it's a really, really beautiful piece. I keep my everyday dishes there. So it's like usable too,
Yeah, I know just the one that you're talking about. And I was actually getting ready to say, I bet you get asked about that thing all the time because I know as bloggers, like whenever people see like just this salt thing behind me, I get asked constantly. I'm sorry, it's just from an antique shop. You'll have to look.
That's always a hard thing. It's kind of nice because it feels original in your house, and that's what's so great about like just antiquing is like finding things that you couldn't find anywhere else. It feels so original and it tells a story, which I love. But then like in our case where we're sharing things, you kind of wish you could help somebody like, hey, you could just go get it right here on Amazon, and then you can't. So
No.
it took me like 2 years to find somebody to build it, and I'm excited that he's been helping me out for the last couple months. So it's cool.
Yeah, that's a good idea, especially when something would like that. I want to take a quick break to tell you about today's sponsor, Tubes & Co. Organic Skincare. So I'm a huge fan of Tubes & Co. Skincare. This morning before heading out to the fair, I put on their frankincense balm for extra moisturizer. In the summer, that's pretty much what I do. I do have their beautiful makeup, everything from the foundation to the bronzer to the highlighter, all beautiful whenever I'm going somewhere with air conditioning and I can actually like put my face on. But on regular summer days, I am just using the basic skincare because I know I'm gonna sweat it all off anyway. So their sea buckthorn cleansing oil, the frankincense tallow balm, which so beautifully moisturizes my face and it actually absorbs in. Unlike a lot of my natural products that I've tried that sit on top because they're a little bit more oily, this one really deeply moisturizes, which is going to be really awesome, especially in the winter whenever I start to get really dry skin. But that is the extent of my summer routine, and I just love the beautiful products from Tubes & Co. They are offering Simple Farmhouse Life podcast listeners 10% off their order with the code Farmhouse. So if you want to try out some of my favorite products, such as their tallow balm, the cleansing oil, the charcoal bar is absolutely beautiful for getting in and cleansing the pores. I used that last night. I keep it really simple in the summer. Or even if you're in the market for an organic, natural makeup that is made from really nice ingredients, it's made in America, a small business which I love supporting. Make sure to head to tubesandco.com and use the code Farmhouse. With your house, with decorating a room, what's your process like? Because with vintage and collecting, it's really hard to just bring a room together because you can't really make this mood board and really, you don't know what you're going to find. So do you make a list of all the things that you need to find in DIY, or how long does it take for you to bring a room together?
So there's a few different ways that I decorate. And just for me, just because decorating is my creative outlet, this is for my own home versus like if I was doing an interior design job, which I don't do, but very, very rarely. But in my case, if I'm going to start from scratch, I usually do an inspiration board, usually use like Canva, and I'll put together just some ideas of like what I would, create. So even if that means it's not necessarily finding the item, let's say I wanted to put like a vintage portrait in there, maybe I would find a vintage portrait just from online and know that that's what I'm going to look for. So that's like if I'm like super organized about it. But then not all the time. So I would say probably like when it comes to buying vintage, I buy what I like. And if it's got a good like ticket price on it and I know it'll fit with my style, I buy it and I'll find a place for it. And I will say probably a good percentage, I find the perfect spot for it. It's almost like it's meant to be. Every once in a while, it's like, oh, why did I buy this? Like, oh no, I don't have a spot for it. The good thing is like you could always resell it like on, Facebook Marketplace or something like that if you did have an item like that. But I think my advice is like never pass something up if it really speaks to you and it feels like a good price. I mean, there's certain things that you're like, oh, it speaks to me, but that is way over my budget, but when it's like in budget or less than maybe what you would have thought you would spend on it. I think when I'm always antiquing or at the flea market, I always have like, I see something, I'm like zoned in. It's like, hawk eyes on this piece and I see it and I'm like, okay, I think I might pay like 15 for that. And then I'll ask like, oh, how much are you selling that? I don't know, $8. Ooh, yes. Okay. And like, so that's kind of like my whole process is like, just like, if it's less than what I was thinking or around the same price, I scoop it up, or I negotiate. But I kind of love the collected feel. I think I've learned to do that though. I don't think that that was necessarily me maybe about 5 years ago, but the more recent Deb feels like I love the process of collecting and making my home feel different than what's out there and building my style from found pieces, because I think that's the cool thing about like decorating with vintage is like they really do tell a story. It's a different process than if you were not sourcing vintage. If you were just doing a home that felt just new and you were buying, all new products for it or sourcing all new items, it's a different process.
Yeah, and it's never done. So I guess maybe old Deb would have just liked to design it, get it done, bring everything in there, and then it'd be done. But new Deb's like, okay, no, I can swap things out. I don't know about you, but I do placeholders a lot of times. So I'll put things, maybe my not favorite print or something in a spot where I hope to maybe find some vintage oil painting or something, and then build it as I find those pieces.
Yeah, absolutely. There are a lot of areas in my house that I'm like, I know I have something in mind for it and I just haven't found it yet. I mean, my dining room alone, I got this table off Facebook Marketplace a year ago, and I have not found the perfect dining room chairs yet. And I've just like let it go. And I just don't have chairs around the table. And I kind of like it because my dining room is a very awkward space, and it's like, again, it's like in the middle of the house, and so it almost feels like a hallway in a way, so that's kind of cool. But I've been collecting these copper colanders, not colanders, bunt pans, and I want to do like a wall. I was inspired actually when we went to Disney in February, and they had the Ratatouille ride, which is a French movie, and they had all this like copper, and it just like inspired me to want to do this copper bunt pans. And so I've been slowly collecting them, and I like visualize it, but I just haven't found enough yet to do it. So
Yeah, being patient, but it'll look amazing whenever you get there.
yeah.
What are some of your go-to decorating secret weapons? So things that whenever you have a spot that you're not sure, that you always just fall back on.
Definitely flowers or stems. I think that that's always a good, like, especially if you have like a weird, like awkward height or corner. Like, I think doing something like that, which is free, right? So, especially if you could just like trim some branches from the yard, I think that automatically elevates a space too. Greenery just, 100% always elevates a space. So, I would say that's definitely like number one go to.
Okay,
I think like creating a great vignette.
I was gonna give you a hint. You do really well with vintage prints and frames and art.
Yeah. So I feel like you asked me about vintage art last time I was on here too. And so
It's been a while. They can hear it again.
No, it's fine. I love vintage art. So again, like when I say like vintage creates character for a space, I think that there's something extra special about vintage art because it's very personal, I think that there's something extra about like what you hang on your walls. And so what attracts you to something, I think is very personal. And I think it's pretty fun because especially if you have like guests at your house, I think like one of the first things that they're going to see is like what's on your walls. And so that creates conversation. And I think for me, I probably have freaked out more guests than normal because they're like, what's up with all the portraits? Like, like what's up with those weird people? And I'm like, oh, I just love it. Like, and to me, I think like, especially with a portrait, I think there's something about a face because it really like draws you in. And so, I think it brings like real character to a room, but I totally know that's not everybody's thing. And so maybe a piece of art attracts you because it's like a place you want to be or a time you wished you lived in, or, like I love like Victorian art because it kind of makes you think like about that Victorian era and like a different time, or maybe it's like a seascape because you really love the ocean. And so I think those things are really cool. I think like vintage prints are great. They definitely fill a space too. I used to have a curated collection with Shop Vintage Supply, and she has a great, great collection. I started kind of venturing away from it a little bit because I think I just love the idea of really collecting real art. And so, and there's, but it's a great like space holder, like we were saying, until you find the right piece because it's a lot cheaper. But I do think there's something really, really wonderful about finding art that you really love and then finding a great place for it.
So do you have any tips for that with art? I've found some really good pieces. I've also bought something and then put it in my house on the wall for a while and then thought, okay, that definitely wasn't it. So what are your tips for finding real pieces?
So again, like finding something that you really like, right? So that's key. I think like, especially if you like you're seeing it in person, right? Versus online, like if you walked past it in a booth or you walked past it at a flea market and it caught your eye, I think that that's like the first thing. Okay, that caught my eyes for a reason. So that's really good. I think also you'll like kind of figure out your own style. Like, so for me, I really love moody art. I love tapestries like behind me. So those are kinds of things that I'm always looking for me. I've seen people, actually one of our vendors, Victoria, she does the French style really nicely. And she has just a beautiful collection of like French florals. And she just does it so wonderfully. And you could just tell that that's her style. That's what attracts her. So I think that's like definitely the first thing is like what attracts you. I think signed art is really key to like really finding something that's good quality. Also, what type you're attracted to. I love oil paintings. Maybe you like sketch art or maybe you like watercolors. And so figuring that out too is going to be helpful. I think what's nice though is like, especially if you're curating a space or you kind of like maybe creating a gallery wall or something like that, it doesn't all have to be the same. I think that's what's really cool. It's like if you found things that were different and you put them together and you looked at like how it worked together and doing something that's like maybe you have a brass frame on one, but then the other one's a frameless canvas. Like that's pretty cool. That really creates a really interesting story and look. So I think that those are great things to look for. Definitely like also turning your art around. And so like when you see the back of a canvas and just see like, is it really aged? Not that I have found some great pieces that were like painted in the 80s or 90s. Like, so it doesn't have to be like really, really old, but if that's your style and you really are going for that, old school, like farmhouse feel or, then I think like turning the canvas around and kind of seeing the age of the canvas is a really good key to know that it's good art too, or old, I should say, old art. Doesn't mean it's good art, but it's old art.
Yeah. Yeah, I have one piece I'm getting ready to get rid of. I think I bought it for definitely less than $50. It's a painting, but after it was in my house for a while, it just definitely did not fit in. It's a mountain and a landscape maybe, but I still don't honestly even know exactly what it is, like what the secret is when it works. But then I get it here and I know it works, but I'd like to be able to I think I'm starting to figure it out before actually having to bring it here, which is good.
Yeah. And colors are important too, because I love like things that are like landscapes and stuff like that, but I noticed they don't work so well in my house because I don't have a lot of blue in my house. And so that's a good key thing to look for too, like that the colors, I guess that's why I like moody, because I have a lot of like warm colors and pops of black in my house. And so that's why probably moody art looks good. So that's key too. When you're shopping, you want to make sure it's colors that work with what's already in your home and your furniture and things like that.
Yeah, that's totally true. Okay, so do you have any other antique shopping finds? So with art, is there a price point you're trying to stay at, or then in general, where are you looking for a lot of your pieces?
So I've gotten art from all over. So flea markets, Facebook Marketplace, eBay, even though they're our competitor now. No, everywhere and anywhere. So I'm always like on the hunt. Even an antique store, like, so wherever I just find good art, I will say it's probably one of those things that I'm always sourcing because I don't know. I guess for me, I just really love it personally. So, and what's really cool now is like with Vintage Keepers, we have a ton of art on Vintage Keepers and really, really good art too from all our vendors. And so what's cool is like, I actually opened up my own vintage shop within Vintage Keepers. So not something I thought I was going to do, but then like decided, well, I thought it was really wise of me to be able to experience what a vendor experience is like as the website owner, and so which has been great because I really have felt it like hands-on, like what they're going
Mhm.
through and how they're learning and all that stuff. And I've kind of like fallen in love with selling vintage now, which is weird because I really consider myself a hoarder because I feel like I have to keep all the vintage for myself when I find it. So it's been fun. And like sourcing art now for my own like shop has been fun because, I had like one piece that's on my shop right now. It's like this windmill scene and it's like blue. And I know it wouldn't work in my house, but I'm like, oh, but it's so pretty. And it just like reminds me of like a French like windmill. And so I, bought it to sell. And so I think that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I'm gonna definitely have to take a look at that because I'm interested in a lot more pieces for around here. Okay, with art, are you layering things or putting like one piece? And I always have a hard time figuring out where I should place them. Like where, right above maybe a chair rail or something like that, or what are some of your favorite places to hang art so it's not just random?
Yeah. So, well, the funny thing is like my perspective is a little different from other people because, especially taller people, because I do kind of decorate like a 5'1" like, so I
Oh,
just think
yeah.
like
Yeah.
that's kind of it. Like I feel like it has to be eye level for me. So,
Yeah.
so I think that that's the first thing. I do kind of love the idea of like unexpected art size and art placement. I think that that is really fun and something worth playing with. I think as a creative person, sometimes, it has to click with your visually, right? So it might be harder for someone who might not be consider themselves like creative. I would say stick with the rules, like stick with like, like you said, above a chair rail, like stick with like that eye level. Like, I think people do make a mistake of like hanging things too high. So definitely stick with eye level no matter what. But I do personally love an unexpected placement of art. Like if it feels like a miniature piece of art and in an area of your home and you're like, oh, that's so small, but I feel like it almost creates interest. So I started a gallery wall going up the stairs. So we have a room upstairs, which is like my candle studio where I pour my candles and stuff. And so we have this like stairway and I started a gallery wall. I don't love it because I feel like I haven't collected the right art for it. But again, like placement, like I've put things there and I'm like, I'll get to it. I'll finish it eventually. But I have this one. So my great uncle was an oil painter and so far I've inherited one of his pieces. My parents have a ton in their house.
Oh, wow.
And it's a larger piece and I actually put it like going up the stairs but like at like the floor level because when you're down here you could see it like directly on and it's probably a very odd place like someone wouldn't maybe naturally think to put a piece of art like at the bottom. It's like a landing. It's hard to
Okay.
explain, I guess.
Yeah.
It's probably easier if I had a photo, but it's like at a landing. It's the bottom of the landing before the second set of stairs. But like when you're standing out here, it's like you see the whole picture. But someone might not naturally think to put a picture there because it's like on the floor in a way. So I think that those kinds of things are fun to play with. I wouldn't be afraid of that because it creates interest. It like shows off your creativity. And so odd shaped, art or too small for a space or too large for a space could be kind of cool.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Okay, so what inspires you? I was going to ask you about books, Instagram accounts, blogs. Are there any noteworthy inspirations that you want to share?
Yeah. So I truly like try to find inspiration everywhere. I mean, we could like start with like just Instagram and Pinterest, right? Like that really is probably my prime place to be, even though I do really feel like it's important to also read magazines and flip through design books because I think they show things differently. And it's kind of fun to also look at design books from a while ago where it's not like super new because you could kind of like inherit, especially if you love things that are vintage or old. So you could kind of inherit that style. I will say, and I wrote a couple blog posts on this on Seeking Lavender Lane. I love like movies that have good homes in them. And I mean, like Nancy Meyers movies, like, oh my
Hmm.
word. Like, I just wrote actually, just did this week. This week, I wrote another blog post. I watched Parent Trap, which was like from 1998. Loved that as a kid. And like, I hadn't shown my daughter yet. And I was like, you have to watch this movie. It's so good. So we watched it as a family last weekend. And so I love anything that she does specifically. And actually, we watched something Gelato. It was not a good movie, but it was in Italy. And since I love like European stuff, just the scenery in it was so amazing. So I love like certain movies like that you could grasp that. I mean, there's like some great designers that I just love. I mean, I love Amber Interiors, Studio McGee. I mean, like those classics are really great. And so, but I feel like, especially when it comes to magazines, I like to buy lots of different types of magazines to inspire my style. And so, like, I love, Country Living because I love the country feel of those magazines. One of my favorites is, I don't know if I'm saying this right, but I think it's like Milieu, Millieu, I think it is. And it is such a great magazine. And it's a little bit more higher end. Veranda, like, so taking kind of like those high-end designer and then taking like the classic country magazines, and like I kind of feel like I fuel myself with all these different design styles so I could kind of create my own, because I love a little bit of each. I love a little bit of that high-end style, but I also really love that real like country style too. So I think that that's kind of fun, is like when you're thinking of like designing your home, or you just love design, is like kind of like have an open mind to like, processing different ways that people are designing and styling their homes.
Yeah, I find all of those enjoyable as well. I love looking at Country Living and Better Homes and Gardens. And then I have several Farmhouse and vintage style books. But yeah, having the variety is definitely helpful to see things you might not have noticed whenever you're just looking at the same ones.
Yeah, absolutely. It broadens it.
Yeah. Okay, tell us where to find you and where to find Vintage Keeper, and all about where to follow up with you.
Sure. So, I've had my blog Seeking Lavender Lane for a while now, so you could find lots about our home, our style, those dish racks, all that kind of stuff, our previous DIY projects, our last home. All of that's over on the blog, all like types of inspiration, whether it's design looks or even, like I said, a blog post on movies that have inspired my style. So that I share over there, always on Instagram at Seeking Lavender Lane. So you could check me out there. And then with our new venture, Vintage Keepers, it's vintage-keepers. And then we're at vintage_keepers_shop. And so we are just inspiring with different vintage finds, what's in the shop, different styles, sharing all of our vendors' beautiful pieces over there. And, we're just getting started. We soft launched in June and will be officially launched this September. And we look forward to all the opportunities that come with it and really getting beautiful vintage finds in people's homes.
Awesome. Well, thank you so very much for taking some time to talk design and vintage with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lisa.
All right, well, thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Simple Farmhouse Life podcast. Make sure to go check out Deb and the inspiration on her page and Vintage Keepers. That will all be in the show notes below. I know I'm going to go look for some art because she really made it sound like there's some great curated art, and I'm always on the lookout for that. But thanks again for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode of the Simple Farmhouse Life podcast.